Getting back in. I know this is getting towards the afternoon, and so if anyone wants to stand up and do a jumping jack or anything, although I don't know, this panel I think is going to keep us very awake, and I'm sure you guys will have a lot of questions. My name is Vivian Greentree. I'm the Director of Research and Policy for Blue Star Families, and I'm going to introduce, we're going to do an interview. I'm going to introduce the panelists, and we'll go through, and I'll let them tell you a little bit about what they have going on right now with their legislative agendas, and some things that they're doing to impact policy. We'll do some questions back and forth, and then we'll open the floor to you guys. We're going to start with Renee Campos, who's the Deputy Director for Government Relations at MOA. Renee joined MOA in October of 2004 as the Deputy Director for Government Relations and Military Family Issues. In September 2007, she assumed the responsibilities for healthcare issues in the area of the Department of Defense and VA health systems. She's also advocates for wounded warrior seamless transition and women in the military and veterans issues, as Renee is a veteran herself. Commander Campos began her 30-year career as a photographer's mate, enlisting in the Navy in 1973, and was commissioned as a naval officer in 1982. Her last assignment was at the Pentagon as the Associate Director for the Office of Family Policy and the Office of the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense. I think some of us have worked with that office and are aware. Renee serves as the co-chairman of the Morale, Welfare, and Recreation, Military Construction and Base Realignment and Closure Committees in the Military Coalition, an organization that represents 34 military veterans organizations with 5.5 million members. She lives in Annapolis, Maryland, with her husband, Al, a retired naval officer. Moving down, Lori Volkman is the Communications Director at the Military Spouse JD Network. Lori is a Navy reservist spouse and the Communications Director for the Military Spouse JD Network. She's an accomplished writer and a Deputy Prosecuting Attorney in Washington State. In her advocacy for military spouses, she has been part of MSJDN's national effort to change laws that require military spouse attorneys to take a new bar exam every time they move. Their group started that with 2 lawyers and has now grown to over 700 in just 2 years. That's so shocking to me that there are so many military spouses that's great. And laws have been changed in 4 states with a dozen more on the horizon, and that's probably even more updated since this has been printed. Lori has enjoyed national publicity after starting an online deployment diary in September 2010 when her husband was deployed to the Middle East, which led to the publication and appearances in the New York Times, at Warblog, Reader's Digest, Newsweek's Daily Beast, and the Department of Defense's Military Family Matters blog, CNN, the NBC Nightly News, and the CBS Evening News. Her blog, Witty Little Secret, was nominated for Best Spouse Blog at the Military Blog Awards in Washington, D.C. in both 2011 and 2012, and Volkman was awarded 2012 Voice of the Year by BlogHer, the Internet's premier blogging platform for women's issues. Lori is also your 2013 Naval Base San Diego Spouse of the Year. And then we have Joyce Razor, who's the Executive Director of National Military Family Association. Joyce became the Executive Director of NMFA in 2007 after serving in various staff positions in the Government Relations Department since 1995. And Joyce guides the management of the association's programs and initiatives that serve the families of the 7 uniformed services, and we're going to make her name all 7.
No problem.
And that promote improvements in their quality of life. Joyce has represented military families on several committees and task forces for the Department of Defense agencies. She's served on the first national board of the directors for Military Child Education Coalition, and in 2004 she authored a chapter on transforming support to military families and communities in a book published by the MIT Press, Filling the Ranks, Transforming the U.S. Military Personnel System. An Army spouse, Joyce earned a Bachelor of Arts in History from Gettysburg College and a Master of Arts in History from the University of Virginia. She is a former teacher and served on the Fort Knox Community School Boards of Education from 93 into 95. Very impressive, ladies. Let's give them all a round of applause. And now we know with the wars drawing down in Iraq and Afghanistan that we're all very, very thankful for. We know that the challenges that are associated with the military lifestyle, though, are not likely to change. And after about a decade of war, we also know that policymakers have become more aware of our unique lifestyle and some of the structural things that they can do in order to make it more sustainable and to allow military families to thrive. We also know that in a time of budget constraints, sequestration has not helped at all in that matter. We know that thoughtful allocation of resources is something that continues to come to the top, which it would anyway, but it's especially relevant right now. So the organizations that are up here, they're the ones who are representing us on the Hill and who are going and talking to thought leaders that will be making those decisions. I guess let's start by maybe going down again and talking about specific things that you guys have either going on right now with regard to legislation, or maybe overall some of the programs that you have that might, the military spouses might be able to plug into to help. Really just kind of give a lay of the land for us. We'll start with Renee.
Well, let me just start by saying I'm just overwhelmed and very excited to spend the last couple days here with you all. I feel like the stories I've heard, your accomplishments are so great that I'm so humbled, and I feel like what I've done is really very minuscule by comparison to what you're doing. So thank you. I think you all know that we all wear many hats. Mine just happened to be in the military, but also as a military spouse. And a lot of times that's not always recognized in terms of serving a career, but also raising a family, kids, and being married to another military member. That you two are, that I'm a military spouse, but like you all, you will always be military spouses. The thing about our organization that I want to kind of convey to you all is that what you know, the many hats that you wear are so important, more important than ever, as Vivian talked about. I don't think in my 30 years in the military and times working policy have I ever seen a more critical juncture than now to work and to use your voice. And believe me, your voices work. And some of these folks here at the table can attest to that because of you, a number of laws have been passed in the last few years. Spouse residency, in-state tuition, my CAA, that was a very interesting evolution of program and a very engaged. I think that's probably the one area we saw social media really showing that it really engaged you all to get to your policymakers. So please don't ever underestimate your abilities. But let me just tell you, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Military Officers Association, we're the largest officer association in the United States. We're the 4th largest veteran service organization. We refer to ourselves as a military service organization. We have 390,000 plus members, 415 chapters in all states and territories. And we are, what I guess you could say our main mission is advocacy. That's our primary role. And I want you to know that in DC, some people think of the term advocate or lobbyist, I'm a registered lobbyist, as an 8-letter bad word. It isn't. But really, when we talk about advocacy, we're really talking about telling your story. It really just comes down to simply that. And members of Congress want to hear your story. If they don't hear your story, they're going to pass laws, they're going to think everything's okay, and they're going to just go about business as usual, and sometimes business as usual isn't getting anything done. But you all have a platform now in which to engage these folks who are in Congress who do not have, we don't have members of Congress that have had a large amount of time in the military. So use that voice. But we are a servant leadership organization. My boss, Vice Admiral Nor Bryan Jr., often tells our military, our government leaders, and so on, that we stand on the shoulders of all those that have come before us, and we want to continue to serve as a servant leader organization, and that the only weapon system that has never let this country down has been our warriors and our families. So don't ever forget that. So you are the powerful weapon, and don't ever underestimate that.
Lori?
You know, I am proud to be here as a representative for the group that we have started, but I am more proud to be here as one of you guys. And I hope that you leave here feeling empowered. This is a summit, you know, we're rising up to the summit today. And one of the things I want to encourage all of you to think about is in your platforms and in the things that you really feel you want to do, and with all this network in this room and online, there's 170 of us that are installation winners. Don't duplicate your efforts. Come together with each other and figure out what your common advocacy platforms are, because there really is some power in numbers and the opportunities that will flow through groups of you. So try to figure out how you're grouped together. One of the things we learned at the Military Spouse JD Network is we thought that military spouse attorneys were such a very rare breed. Every single attorney that has come to our organization has said the same thing. I thought I was the only one. And as you reach out to your other installation winners and group those networks and find the other leaders who are not installation winners but that are within your networks, you guys can grow an amazing organization. What we are doing at the Military Spouse JD Network is trying to change the laws in all 50 states for lawyers who have to take a bar exam every time they PCS. It's expensive and time consuming, and it adds to that career portability problem. That was our initial mission, and we are one of those nonprofits who's famous for the mission creep, it's called. Because what we have managed to do now is start looking outward. We have 700 military spouse attorneys. And one of the things I am fond of saying is that we can get a lot done because we're attorneys and we know how to do advocacy, but the reason that we have succeeded is because we have the resiliency and the know-how as military spouses to take it to the next level and make sure that it gets finished. So what we're doing now is we want to know, as you're starting your nonprofits, as you're starting your groups, what kind of assistance you need in terms of advocacy. We also don't want to duplicate efforts. So when we know that MOA has a legislative team that's working on an issue, we want to help direct you. Blue Star Families has an amazing professional network. We want to direct you to those groups. NMSA, these guys we're all working together to network and not try to duplicate services. I think that's something we're really happy about. But that sort of answers your question, Vivian, I think, about the whole sequestration thing. Everyone's really looking at not duplicating services. So help each other, refer each other, and then come talk to us about advocacy. I mean, we're going to talk about it a little here today, but it's amazing how much of a powerful voice you have, especially now that you can walk in and say, I'm, you know, the Military Spouse of the Year representative from Naval Base San Diego, and here are my issues that we want to talk to you about today. It's a very powerful voice you have.
Hi, it's great to be here in a room full of advocates, and I'm so glad that everybody on the panel is talking about small a advocacy that can translate into big R results, and that we all are advocates. National Military Family Association has been around for a while, but our roots are relevant today to all of us. We got our start from a group of military spouses sitting around a kitchen table in Annapolis, Maryland, these were military retiree spouses who were tired of watching their friends become destitute when that military retiree died because there was no survivor benefit plan. All these ladies had was a little bit of Social Security, and that's it. And these women in 1969 said, enough, we're gonna do something about that. And you think about what was going on in this country, you know, this is the middle of the Vietnam War. The military is not all that popular, but these ladies had a mission, put on their hats and gloves, because they wore hats and gloves then, and went up to Capitol Hill, knocked on doors, walked the halls, and if you think those wearing high heels is comfortable on marble floors on Capitol Hill, it's not. But they did that, and the result of their effort was the DoD Survivor Benefit Plan. So which wouldn't have happened without those ladies. Those ladies got that legislation, and the other thing they did, they formed an organization which became the National Military Family Association, because they said there are more issues that we as military spouses can solve. And the other thing they did was send thank you letters to Congress. Now, members of Congress don't get many thank you letters. And so that made an impression, and that opened doors for those ladies and all of us that came after, who were continuing our work as advocates on behalf of military families. So today, 40-some years later, we're still dealing with support for our families of the fallen as advocates, looking at legislation, looking at policy, looking at community support. We're looking at those issues that affect the families of our deployed service members, the financial well-being of our military families. We've succeeded in persuading Congress, both by ourselves and with many of our partners like MOA and the other military coalition organizations, of changes that are needed for military families, improvements to TRICARE, the WIC program overseas, for example, and continue to look at those issues. Certainly, we've talked a lot about sequestration. That's a big issue right now that we're working, trying to remind folks that we are still a nation at war. We are still a military at war. And so cuts to programs that support military families, whether they're in the Defense Department or in other departments like the Department of Education, will affect the readiness of the service members and that service members' ability to do their job, and the family's ability to support that service member in their job. And so looking at that issue, looking at all the changes that have happened over more than a decade of war, and saying, what are families still going to need as we as a nation transition out of war? Understanding that those families who will continue to serve will still be called on to deal with the deployment of a loved one to a dangerous place. We'll still be called on to do all those moves. We'll still be called on to support their children as they and their family deal with the legacy of over a decade of war. So our mission isn't getting smaller because of the end of the war. Our mission is getting even more complex.
That's a really good point. And so maybe to go back to with Renee and Joyce, since you guys do have the more robust legislative agendas, we're about to release our 2013 Military Family Lifestyle Survey, which talks about the top concerns of military families. And the top 5 seem to center around financial health and well-being, and then mental health and wellness of the families. But looking at the things that you guys are looking at, so as you guys look to what the issues that you're passionate about, aligning them with the policy windows, which tend to be a moving target, is very important when you're trying to hold the attention of your elected leaders and your policymakers, both within and external to the Department of Defense and the VA, and government agencies or state level, local level, and federal level policymakers. So what are the issues that you guys think are the hot topics for this year that you think would be wise to focus on or align what their priorities are to fall within a larger legislative agenda?
We've talked about some of them today already. My sense is that we've talked about the big ones. We've talked about sequestration. Funding is going to be cut. Whether we have sequestration continue or not, funding's still going to be cut. We've heard about spouse employment issues, spouse education issues. Because those key in not just in terms of the spouse education and career, but also in family financial stability. So they're important for a couple reasons. My sense is we're still going to have issues related to children's education. We're still going to have a lot of issues with behavioral health. We hear the same thing that you'd hear. Not all on the treatment end, but how do we help families who've been through so much and are going to continue to experience change? How do we help them remain strong? Where are the people who are going to be available to do that? Where are the programs? What needs to be beefed up rather than what needs to be cut? And so, working these issues is going to take input from the grassroots up to folks who can help channel it to the appropriate folks, whether on the Hill, whether in DOD, whether back in the states. Not all issues are going to be solved at the DOD or the congressional level. Some we have to work the state issues, and I think the Military Spouse JD Network is a great example of how you take an issue that Congress doesn't own the solution for and work it where it needs to be worked.
Renee?
I think, too, you have to think local, as Joyce is saying. Everything is local. Politics is local. Issues are local, those kinds of things. So I think that you all are seeing probably a lot more clearly at the installation level than what we see here in DC or what our elected officials see. You see the erosion of benefits right now. You're seeing those. You're seeing your family support programs being cut. And those are the concerns that we have. When there are budget cuts, there are forced cuts. Some people think, oh, that's not going to affect anybody, but it does. It always translates to the support programs that support those troops. So we're concerned, and we've been fighting the fight on budgets for now a number of years. But your health care is on and has been on the radar scope for quite some time, and we're going to see additional increases. We're going to probably see some programs that have grown up in the last decade kind of level off or go away, period, just because they're not sustainable. So, you know, there's a lot of things that will translate to you directly. But I think where you can be the most effective is don't count on Congress. What you need to do is gather your network at the local level, because at the end of the day, we're all networkers. And we have a broader network than even our military spouses have, because we have our professional networks, we have our own family networks, and we have our military spouse network. So use those networks and then engage with your grassroots folks, the nonprofits, or create your own. But make sure that the commanders know you're there to help them, because you know what? They don't want to see those programs go away, because they're saying that our warriors and families are our most important asset, and yet you all see the programs being cut. Help them articulate that issue up their chain of command.
That's what we always say when we meet with policy leaders. Help us help you. We're trying to help you guys.
Exactly.
Let it be easier for all of us.
Can I just add one more thing, and that is the other important thing is the American people. We've been, you know, over a decade now at war, and there's still, because we're less than 1% of the population, you have a responsibility, we have a responsibility to educate the American public of who we are and what we do. Because in the end, you need them to help sustain a viable all-volunteer force.
Well, I wanted to echo that, and that's, you know, that's where you start educating Congress, is you start educating Congress about the issues facing military families with the folks in your community, with the people in your workplace, your kids' schools, your, you know, civic organizations that you belong to, the folks you encounter in church, at the youth soccer league, wherever. Those are the places you start to educate the public, and it does filter up to Congress. Congress does want to support military families. They have a well-deserved reputation right now about being this big dysfunctional bureaucracy that's not doing anything, but they can do things, and they have done things. And every member that talks to us says we want to help military families, but we don't know how. So you have a role in that, how to help military families, because your story tells them what's going on, and your story combined with a lot of other stories, with the results of the Blue Star Families Survey, with the results of our various surveys, put that all together, that's a lot of information about military families that we together can take up to the Hill, take to DOD, take to a state legislature if we're working a state issue. As so many people have said, use your connections. We're part of your connections. Yeah. And so share those stories with us and with each other.
And now that everyone's raring to go and talk to all of their elected leadership and their thought leaders and policymakers, real quick, because we do want to be able to take questions, do you guys have any insight on how to start that dialogue, or how would you suggest that a military spouse, if she did want, or if she or he did want to go to their elected official, their local congressman or state senator, U.S. senator, what's the best protocol for that?
I got a book for you.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Call Moa.
And they're outside on the table. A few years ago when I came here, I said, to Moa, I said, we need a guide that's really basic, because how do you take, people want to engage, you guys are engaging, but I mean, if you tell me I want you to advocate, that's scary. I mean, I don't even know what, you can be big or small or whatever, but we have a checklist in here, and we have things to do that you can do to get started. But, again, it really is understanding kind of your surrounding areas. What are the issues to your local area? Know your members of Congress. Know if they're military friendly, if they're veteran friendly.
Know if they're on the military family caucuses.
Right, or in what committees that they're on. Know their staff. And again, don't be afraid to reach out to them and say, hey, and a resource to them. We actually have many times, I mean, and Joyce gets this all the time as well, and our other military coalition partners, is that the staff in particular really reach out to you as subject matter experts. So you're the boots on the ground subject matter expert. They care a lot more about hearing from you than from us. So
that's true.
Yeah, and so start locally. You don't have to just contact the office here. At every community, not too far away, there's a local office of your member of Congress. Yeah, the member doesn't hang out there much, but they have staff, and those folks are collecting information from the grassroots to take back to the member. And if you do, and as Military Spouses of the Year, you have a great entry point. Introduce yourself. I've heard suggestions about having town meetings. Invite that local staff to the town meeting. Now, make sure your PAO office knows about that, but make that connection. Do you do a regular blog? Get on their mailing list so that you get information from them, but also give them your information about your blog so that their staffers are looking at that.
And let them know about events that you guys are already doing in your area, on base and off base, and with your families and in your communities.
And don't let the youth and seeming inexperience of staff members turn you off. Yes, a lot of the congressional staffers that work for members look like your younger sibling who just got out of college. But they have incredible power because they control what makes it to the member's desk. And so sometimes you can have more of an effect talking to a staffer about your issue than 5 minutes with the member, because that staffer is going to ask you questions, they're going to want to follow up with you, and so use those relationships and develop the relationships with the staff. Very, very important.
I want to add from a grassroots more standpoint that we learned some really valuable lessons up front. Our founder, Mary Redding, started the Military Spouse JD Network when she moved to a new jurisdiction and tried to get the laws changed in Arizona. And for lawyers, that means convincing the Supreme Court, not Congress, that they should change the rules about legal licensing. So she started lobbying about how all this stuff that had happened to her and all of these problems she was having, and she really did not have success doing that. It was only when she reached out to other spouses and found out what the systemic issue was, and she could focus on telling other people's stories instead of only her own to explain. She wasn't coming here to ask for something for herself. She was coming to ask for something on behalf of a group of individuals that were going to have an impact on the person that she was doing the ask for in a way that would, have a large impact. The other thing we learned is every meeting you have with someone who has influence, whether they're in Congress or not, needs to be about a partnership. You are not going there asking for something. You always have something to offer them. And something my mentor right out of law school told me that I have followed every day is never give up an opportunity to make someone else a hero. And if you can do that with a congressman or a legislator or anyone who's got influence over your area, you will gain an ally, and you will become that subject matter expert that legislative staff member will come to and say, hey, we have this issue, can you connect us to the right people? It's really important to not think of it as a one-way street.
It's important, too, to also thank them for what they've done on your behalf, because, again, it's really about, as well as your, your senior officials at your installations, too, because they've got a hard job.
Yeah.
They will remember you well if you say thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
They'll remember
you, no
if
matter
you
how
don't.
small it may seem what they did was. Thank them. We want to get some questions in. Does anyone have want to start? From the DOD official in the room?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, we are the press,
advocate.
right, gotcha. Okay.
Megan Grady, military spouse.
Well, I do want to say, actually, from a DOD official standpoint, I just wanted to share that we do have an office within the Office of Military Community Family Policy called the State Liaison Office. And we work very closely with all of the ladies that are sitting up at the table right there. And we have regional state liaisons who work with each state's governments to help them understand what the challenges of military spouses and military families. In particular for spouses, they're really working on the credentialing, training, and licensing issues. And so what I'd like to do, and I'm sure Marcus Beauregard will love me for it, he would love to connect with all of you in your states and tell you who your state liaisons are.
We have that list on our Blue Star
Perfect.
networks within our educators, healthcare professionals, and entrepreneurs on Facebook. Marcus has given us the list of the regional liaisons for each state and within each region, so I would definitely recommend that as a resource for getting started. And they're a wealth of information on what's already been done in that state. They issue updates monthly on where states are within their own, within about 10 different, their portfolio of issues, and if they've passed legislation or if they have it on the table, and who might be good within that state to look for if you are advocating.
And that's really important, because whether you go to a state legislator or a member of Congress, one of the first things that they're going to ask you is, okay, how big is this issue? And the other thing they're going to try to sort out is what's already been done. Right. And nothing makes a member of Congress angrier than if you go to say, we really need legislation on this, and they may say, well, but that's not within our purview. Congress can't do anything about unemployment compensation for military spouses when they move. The states can, and that's one of the issues DOD state liaison works. Congress will get very angry if they've already passed a law and you're asking them to pass the same law again. So, do your research. And so that the DOD State Liaison Office, they've really pulled through those key issues and looked for where DOD can support making a difference at the state level, and have made a lot of progress. And so do look at that. Google DOD State Liaison Office and USA for Military Families will come up. And it's a great place to start for you in your research.
That's true. Is there Karen?
Yeah, I have a question. Most of us have lived in various places. We are registered voters in one state, and we live in another. Mm-hmm. So when you go to your Congress critter, and you say, I am from wherever, and they look at you, but where do you live now? So you've got that issue with, is your point of view still important to, in my instance, Minnesota, or the fact that I've lived here in Northern Virginia for 5 years. So where do you go?
If it's a national issue, your military families are actually kind of lucky because in many cases they have members of Congress from 2 states. As you said, you may have kept your registration in one state, but now you live in another. And so technically you belong to both of those states. I mean, sometimes you have to convince them. A lot of members of Congress only want to deal with people in their state, people who vote. I made the decision as a military spouse, and this is pre-Military Spouse Residency Relief Act, that I was always going to register to vote where my kids went to school, because I wanted to be able to say to those school officials who controlled what was happening to my kids, I vote in your district. But in terms of a member of Congress, you can start off your communication by saying, I am a military family member registered to vote in your state, but we are currently assigned in another state, or flip it. And a lot of times that works. Some spouses will go in and say, you're responsible for the military no matter where we are. Some members will buy that, others won't. But the other piece you have is you have family and friends in other states. So if this is an issue that's important for military families, enlist them. You may no longer be living in Minnesota, but your mom and dad still vote there, your brothers and sisters still vote there. They may be working as a campaign volunteer, contributing to that campaign, voting in that community. Get them to write a letter too, saying,
That's a good,
my
use your
kids in the
network
military.
to leverage the power of the
Yeah,
good.
use those connections.
And I think we've run out of time, but I know that each of these ladies is going to be around, and also they're very available online. But maybe we can kind of move off the stage after the final wrap up, so that if you guys have any more questions, and I of course will stay too. I do have good childcare for today. But thank you so much for spending your time with us, and thank you guys for what you do.
Thanks, guys. Terrific panel. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.